Hi, Robert Rotenberg here, and excited to introduce to you my eighth novel. I always wanted to be a writer, and even in high school, I was writing short stories. I once sent a short story to the New Yorker, which they sent a rejection letter, which I thought was pretty terrific. So recently I went back and looked at my box of early writing, and here they are, some of the earliest short stories, poems, diary entries. Uh, See, creative writing. So I was determined to be a novelist, but of course, life doesn't always go in a straight line. After going to university, studying English, and taking a year off to try to write a novel, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I ended up in law school, determined to never be a lawyer. So 10 days after I was called to the bar, I got on a plane and I went to Paris. And in France, I was the managing editor of Passion magazine for about a year. Then I came home and I started my own magazine with one of my best friends called Tio Magazine, which we did for many, many years. And finally, I was in my mid-30s. Our first child was about to be born, and I was broke. So I went back to practice law. And the very first day, I went to Scarborough Provincial Court. If you're a criminal lawyer in Toronto, you'll know what Scarborough Provincial Court was like. I drove home that day and I thought, I can't do just this for the rest of my life. And that day, I started my first novel. Now, it just so happened on July 4th, way back then, we ended up in a place called Stanhope, Quebec, Derby Line, Vermont. It's a famous town right on the border. And we were there for the July 4th parade. It was a wonderful, typical spectacle. And I had this idea, well, what if a female assassin was crossing the border on her way to kill the G7 leaders? Mulroney, Mitterrand, Reagan, Thatcher, they all came to Toronto in July of 1988. I knew it was a fantastic opening scene for a book that I want to write one day. So that day after court, I started my first book. Here you can see my 1988 old box. I gave it some terrible titles. Get the G7, Kill the G7. Finally, I came up with the title Heart House. I never loved the title, but it was all I could think of. Why Heart House? It's a world-famous, spectacular building. It's the place where on the last day of the G7 meeting, on the patio in the outdoor famous quadrangle, all the world leaders met. There's an extraordinarily famous photo of that meeting that's in my book. But I had a personal connection. I lived in my second year at University of Toronto in Heart House. On the third floor, there were 3 little apartments, and I lived in the middle one, which looked right out onto the patio. I went to work, and it took me 10 years to write the manuscript. Yes, 10 years. I submitted it to a bunch of agents in New York. I found in here one of my submission letters, March 24th, 2023. I got an agent. She submitted to all the top publishers in New York. And again, I got rejection letters, but they were good rejection letters. They said they really liked the writing. The one chapter they loved was about a small town lawyer driving his beat up old Camaro to court. Then a writer friend of mine said, Bobby, you're making a mistake every new writer makes. You're writing and rewriting the same book. It's not a book, it's a career. Put it away, start your second book. I started my second novel. It took 10 years to write Old City Hall. I'm proud to say it was not just a bestseller, but it was an international success. We sold it in 9 countries. Since then, I've written 6 more novels. What to do next? That novel in the drawer, Heart House, I had this idea. What if I made it a prequel? My main character, Detective Ari Green, is a young cop back in 1988, and he's chasing the assassin all the way to Heart House. I was nervous. I pulled it out of the virtual drawer and sent it to my 2 main readers, Catherine MacDonald and Gloria Cassidy. I said, I know it's got a lot of flaws. Tell me if the pages turn. Yes, they said. Then I sent it to my in-house editor at Simon Schuster, Adriana Kerr. She said, Bobby, wow, couldn't put it down. The bath water got cold. So I did what I always do. I went back to work, editing, cutting, adding, editing, cutting, adding. But what was I going to call this book? Well, my brilliant editor, Lori Grassi, came up with the idea that instead of chapters, we should have countdown. 6.15 hours, 49 hours, all the way down to 46 hours, all the way down to the last minute. It was a great idea. And then the title popped into my head. And here it is, 1 minute more.